All right, let's dive deep into the brain today.
Sounds good to me.
We're going to be talking about calcium and potassium channels
Oh, yeah.
and how they are involved with cannabinoids and psychedelics.
Yeah, this will be a good one.
This is going to be complex, but I think it'll be worth it.
Absolutely.
So we're basically talking about these tiny little gateways
Yeah,
that control the flow of ions in our brains.
that's right.
And that's important because that flow shapes the electrical activity of our brains.
Exactly. It's everything from our thoughts and feelings to our movements
Oh, wow.
and our perceptions.
So like literally everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
So if we can understand these channels, we can understand how things like THC
Right.
or LSD actually work.
Exactly.
So we were kind of like pulling back the curtain on how our brains work.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, so both of these channels that we're talking about,
Right.
calcium and potassium channels, are types of proteins, right?
It's right.
Embedded in the cell membrane.
Yep. They act as these little selective pores,
Okay.
allowing these ions to pass in and out of the cell.
So it's like a very carefully choreographed dance
is.
of charged particles.
Yeah.
And these channels are like the choreographers.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
So when we're talking about calcium channels, it's not just one type.
Okay.
There's a whole family of calcium channels,
Right.
each with their own like personality and quirks.
Exactly.
So L-type, N-type, T-type.
Yeah, those are some of the big ones.
What makes them different?
So one key difference is how they're triggered to open.
Okay.
For example, L-type channels, they are what we call voltage gated.
Okay.
And so they open when the cell's electrical potential changes.
So like a surge of electricity makes them swing open.
Exactly.
And then calcium can flood in.
Yeah.
Okay, then that influx of calcium, it has all sorts of effects, right?
Yeah, depends on the cell type.
Okay.
In heart muscle cells, it triggers contraction. While in neurons, it can lead to the release of neurotransmitters.
Okay, so the brain's chemical messengers.
Exactly.
So L-type channels are involved in both muscle function and brain communication.
You got it.
That's pretty cool.
It is, yeah.
What about N-type channels?
So N-types are also voltage gated,
Okay.
but they are particularly important for the release of neurotransmitters involved in pain signaling.
Interesting.
In fact, some pain medications work by specifically blocking N-type channels.
Wow. So they're kind of taking advantage of this,
Yeah, exactly.
this natural mechanism.
Yeah. Nature has some pretty ingenious ways of manipulating these channels.
Okay, so each type has a very specialized role.
For sure.
What about T-type channels?
So T-type channels are a little bit different.
Right.
They have a lower activation threshold.
So they're kind of like the sensitive ones.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay.
Meaning they open more easily in response to smaller changes in voltage.
So they don't need as much of like a push
Exactly.
to let that calcium in.
You got it.
Interesting. Okay.
And this sensitivity makes them really important for generating rhythmic firing patterns in neurons,
Okay.
which is crucial for things like heartbeat regulation and sleep-wake cycles.
Yeah. So these are all really important processes.
Absolutely.
Wow. I'm starting to see how all of this kind of fits together.
Yeah.
Like different calcium channels, different triggers,
Yeah.
different roles in the body.
Right.
What happens when these channels don't work
Well,
properly?
that's when things can go wrong.
Oh, no.
Dysfunctional calcium channels have been implicated in a whole bunch of diseases.
Right.
Like everything from epilepsy and migraines to heart arrhythmias
Wow.
and even neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's disease.
Wow. That's a lot.
It is, yeah.
These tiny little channels are really important
They really are.
for our health.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about this whole family of calcium channels.
Right.
But we also have a diverse group of potassium channels.
Mm-hmm.
So these potassium channels, they're basically responsible for like putting the brakes on
Yeah, you could say that.
the neuronal activity.
That's right. So potassium channels are essentially responsible for repolarizing the neuron,
Okay.
bringing it back to its resting state
Oh,
after a burst of activity.
So they're like the reset button
Exactly.
to make sure that the neuron doesn't get stuck
Right.
in an excited state.
Yep.
So are these potassium channels triggered in the same way as the calcium channels?
Some are, some aren't.
Okay.
So for instance, you have voltage-gated potassium channels similar to the L-type calcium channels.
Okay.
They open in response to changes in the membrane potential,
Okay.
allowing potassium ions to flow out of the cell.
So this outflow of potassium, that helps to counteract the effect of the calcium influx.
Precisely.
Wow. Okay.
Then we have calcium-activated potassium channels.
Okay.
And as the name suggests,
Yeah.
these channels are activated by increases in intracellular calcium.
So it's like a feedback loop.
Exactly.
Okay.
As calcium levels rise, these channels open, allowing potassium to flow out
Okay.
and dampen that excitability.
So it's like a built-in safety mechanism.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
And then we have potassium channels that are activated by physical forces,
We do.
like actually stretching the cell.
Exactly.
Whoa, okay.
These are called stretch-activated channels.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and they're found in various cell types, including sensory neurons that are involved in touch, hearing, and proprioception,
Wow.
which is our sense of body position.
So it like literally pressing on your skin
Yeah.
can cause these channels to open.
Yeah, that's right.
Whoa. It's pretty amazing.
So we've got channels that are activated by voltage,
Yep.
by calcium, and even by physical forces. Why is there so much variety?
Well, all this diversity, it allows for this incredibly fine-tuned control over neuronal activity.
So it's really important to have all these different types of channels.
It is.
Wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see the beauty and complexity of this system.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
So we've covered a lot of ground here just on the basics of these channels.
We have.
But I'm really curious to see how cannabinoids and psychedelics fit into this picture.
That's where the real mystery unfolds.
Alrighty.
Let's do it. So we've laid the groundwork.
Yeah, we've talked about the basics.
Exploring these families of channels.
Yeah.
Now let's see how they become entangled with cannabinoids and psychedelics.
I'm really curious about this because it's not as simple as them just like sticking to the channels, right?
You're right. It's a little more nuanced.
Okay.
Remember, cannabinoids like THC mainly work through the CB1 receptor,
Okay.
while psychedelics, they often act on serotonin receptors.
And those receptors are also proteins embedded in the cell membrane, right?
That's right.
So how do they communicate with the calcium and potassium channels if they're not directly bound together?
It's all about these signaling cascades.
Oh, that happened within the cell.
So it's kind of like a domino effect.
Yeah, you could think of it like that.
Okay.
When THC or LSD binds to their respective receptors,
Okay.
they trigger this whole chain reaction
Got it.
of molecular events.
So the binding is like the first domino.
Exactly.
And then what? Like, how does that actually affect the channels?
Well, the signaling cascades can ultimately lead to changes in the channel's behavior.
Okay.
So they might become more or less likely to open.
Correct.
Or the duration of their opening might change.
So it's not just a simple on-off switch.
Right. It's more like a dimmer switch.
Okay.
Fine-tuning the channel's activity.
That makes sense.
And the specifics of how this happens can vary, depending on the substance, the type of channel, and the neuron involved.
So there's a lot of variation.
There is.
Can we maybe walk through an example
Sure.
of like how THC might influence a calcium channel?
So let's imagine THC binding to a CB1 receptor on a neuron.
Okay.
That binding can activate a G protein.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about G proteins.
They're like molecular messengers inside the cell.
Yeah.
And in this case, the activated G protein can interact with other enzymes and molecules,
Okay.
setting off a chain reaction
Okay.
that ultimately affects the calcium channel.
So it's like a game of molecular tag
Yeah, kind of.
where the message gets passed down
Exactly.
until it reaches the channel.
Right.
What's the message? Like, is it always to shut down?
Not always.
Okay.
Sometimes the message might be to open wider,
Okay.
allowing more calcium in.
Okay.
Other times it might be to close the channel more tightly
Got it.
to restrict calcium flow.
So there's lots of possibilities.
Yeah, there are a lot of possibilities.
Okay, so we've got these indirect interactions happening
Right.
with THC and LSD setting off chain reactions.
Yep.
They can kind of tweak the activity of these channels.
Exactly.
But how does that translate to the actual effects we experience from these drugs?
That's the million-dollar question. You know, the feeling of being high or having a psychedelic trip.
Right.
Ultimately, the way we feel and think
Yeah.
is shaped by the complex interplay of countless neurons.
Yeah, it's not just one channel. It's a network
Exactly.
working together.
And by modulating the activity of these channels,
Okay.
cannabinoids and psychedelics can shift that pattern of activity,
Got it.
leading to the effects we associate with them.
Can we maybe do like a specific example with THC?
Sure.
How might its effects on these channels lead to like the feeling of relaxation?
Well, we know THC can dampen neuronal activity in certain brain regions,
Okay.
particularly those involved in stress and anxiety.
Okay.
This could be due in part to its effects on potassium channels.
So like enhancing the activity of those potassium channels.
Right, that's one possibility.
They're kind of calming things down.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And in other brain areas like the reward pathway, THC might be doing the opposite.
Okay.
Enhancing dopamine release,
Okay.
contributing to feelings of euphoria.
So it really depends on the area of the brain
It does.
and what's going on there.
Exactly. And to make things even more complex,
Yeah.
these effects can vary
Yeah.
depending on the dose, the individual, and their prior experiences.
It's really personalized.
Very personalized.
All right, so let's shift gears and talk about psychedelics.
Okay.
Their effects on the brain are even more mysterious.
There you are.
But we're starting to understand how channel modulation might be involved.
Right.
THC seems to tweak things pretty subtly, but psychedelics really shake things up.
Yeah, they do.
How does that play out at the level of these channels?
Well, one theory is that psychedelics, through their interactions with serotonin receptors, might disrupt the normal filtering of sensory information in the brain.
So instead of the brain processing everything neatly, it gets jumbled up?
Exactly.
Okay.
And this disruption could be due to changes in the activity of these channels in specific brain regions.
Which regions?
Like the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, and what does that do?
Which is involved in higher level thinking and decision making.
So psychedelics are kind of messing with the higher level thinking.
You could say that.
Interesting.
It makes me think of that saying.
Yeah.
Neurons that fire together wire together.
Right.
So if psychedelics are changing those patterns, could they be rewiring the brain?
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, and there's growing evidence that psychedelics can promote neuroplasticity.
Okay.
Which is the brain's ability to change.
So those experiences people have on psychedelics could actually leave a lasting imprint.
That's one of the possibilities.
Wow.
And this could have big implications for using psychedelics to treat conditions like depression, anxiety, and addiction.
That's really interesting.
It is, yeah.
So this opens up a whole world of possibilities.
It does.
But we've only scratched the surface
Right.
of how these channels are produced and removed.
There's another layer to the story.
Okay.
These channels aren't just static. They're constantly being produced, transported, and broken down.
So it's a very dynamic process.
It is.
So it's not just about whether a channel's open or closed.
Right.
It's about how many are present.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
And this process can be influenced by various factors, including drug exposure.
So could long-term drug use actually change the number of channels?
That's a possibility.
Wow.
Research is still ongoing.
Okay.
But we know that chronic exposure can lead to changes in gene expression, which could affect the production.
So it's not just the immediate high.
Right.
It's the potential for long-term changes.
That's right.
Wow, this is really interesting.
It is.
It's a humbling reminder of how complex our brains are. Yeah.
And how much we still have to learn.
Okay, so let's take all this information.
Okay.
And in the last part of this deep dive,
Yeah.
talk about what the future holds.
Sounds good.
For our understanding of these channels.
All right.
And their potential for revolutionizing medicine.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've spent this whole deep dive going deep into these calcium potassium channels.
Yeah, we've talked about the different types, how they work.
How they're modulated.
Right.
Even how they're produced and recycled.
It's a lot.
It is a lot, but I think it's all really fascinating.
Me too.
Now, I'm curious about what this all means for the future.
Well, it's a really exciting time to be thinking about this field.
Okay.
We've uncovered so much about these channels.
Yeah.
And this knowledge has the potential to revolutionize medicine.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. So we've kind of hinted at it throughout this whole discussion.
Right.
But how could understanding these channels lead to new treatments?
Imagine a future where we can develop drugs that act like molecular snipers.
Okay.
Targeting very specific subtypes of these channels.
So instead of using, like, a sledgehammer,
right,
it's more like using a scalpel.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Take chronic pain, for example. We know that N-type calcium channels play a key role in pain signaling. What if we could develop a drug that just blocks those channels in the affected area?
So that it doesn't affect other things going on in the body.
Precisely.
That would be amazing.
I think that'd be a game changer for a lot of people.
And what about other conditions like epilepsy?
Yeah.
We talked about how those can be linked to channel dysfunction as well.
That's right.
Could we target those to maybe prevent or control seizures?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Some existing anti-epileptic drugs already work this way.
Okay.
But they often have a lot of side effects.
Right, because they're not as targeted.
Exactly.
What if we could hone in on the specific subtype?
Exactly.
That would be incredible.
It would.
So this is all starting to sound a little bit like science fiction.
Yeah.
But are you saying that this could be a reality in the future?
I think so.
Okay.
Research is advancing so rapidly.
Let's go.
We're gaining a much better understanding
Yeah.
of these channels.
Okay, so we've got these targeted therapies on the horizon. What about cannabinoids and psychedelics?
Yeah.
How do they fit into this future of medicine?
Well, that's one of the most interesting questions right now.
Yeah.
We're already seeing cannabinoid-based medicines
Okay.
being used for conditions like chronic pain, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis.
Right.
And the potential for psychedelics is being explored in clinical trials for things like depression, anxiety, and addiction.
So these substances that were once kind of like demonized are now being looked at for their healing properties.
It's pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
It shows the power of scientific inquiry
Yeah.
and challenging our assumptions.
So who knows what other discoveries await us
Right.
as we keep learning more about these channels.
Yeah, it's a fascinating field.
Well, I'm definitely leaving this deep dive with a sense of awe and optimism.
Me too.
It's incredible to think that these tiny channels have so much potential.
They do.
For both understanding ourselves
Oh,
and for healing.
exactly.
It's really exciting. It is.
To our listeners, keep asking questions, keep learning,
Yeah, stay curious.
and stay tuned.
Yes,
The future of medicine is being written right now,
it is.
and it's going to be an amazing journey.
It is.
So this has been The Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.